All right, everybody, welcome back to Limitless Stories. And on today's episode, I have the pleasure of chatting with Kendra Coupland. She identifies with the pronouns she, her, and she's a meditation teacher, yoga grandmaster, and a multidisciplinary artist of mixed Caribbean and Romani heritage. As a survivor of sexual violence, Kendra brings a compassionate, trauma informed, and intersectional framework to her practice. Her work strives to create safer spaces for people who experience marginalization to practice self liberation. And she is wholeheartedly dedicated to building communities of loving kindness and care. So I would love all of you to join us today as we dive into her journey exploring the role of mindfulness, fitness, and intentional relationship building in her success and uncovering lessons that shaped her along the way. So, with that being said, we introduced Kendra. We are so happy to have you on the platform. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm good today. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Nice. So, first things first, we always like to get a little background about Kendra. So, in the words herself, the intro spoke volumes, but we just want to get a glimpse of who Kendra is on a day to day. What did you do over the weekend? How do you typically spend your weekends? You know?
Oh my gosh. Right now, I'm in the middle of writing like a 500-hour yoga teacher training. So I, like, ironically enough, spent my weekend hunched over a computer writing about spinal health. It was a bit counterintuitive. I remember like standing up at one point and being like, right, my own spine. So
Oh, I had to readjust a little bit.
yeah, we
Yeah.
often don't pay much attention to our backs until they're like yelling at us and they're like, hey, I exist, move me.
Right, a lot of movement, right? Spinal health. What about spinal health? What did you learn about spinal health?
I mean, what I was writing about was more on like just being mindful when students are moving that, people coming in with like spinal injuries and things like that shouldn't do particular postures and more stuff like that.
All right, 500-hour course. That's a long course.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a lot of work and productive weekend, we can say. So, how many courses have you written that are similar to that over the years?
I mean, this is the first like big yoga teacher training. So I recently opened a yoga school, and I registered it with the Yoga Alliance of India. And this is
Nice.
the first kind of like yoga teacher training per se that will be like an all-encompassing training. But I I kind of work in three spaces. I work with marginalized communities one-on-one and in small groups. I work with organizations that need support for folks who are maybe doing activism work or social work and their employees are burnt out and they need some extra support. And then I work with other yoga teachers. So as a yoga grandmaster, I've completed about 1,000 hours of training. And then I've been
Congrats.
teaching for about 8 years. So I'm here to also support yoga teachers often who have like 200 or 500-hour level training, or they might have a very Western understanding of yoga, but they want to go a lot deeper into the practice um, and more decolonize the practice. And so I'm also there to support those folks as well.
I love that. I love that. The ability to just kind of merge everything into the essence of what yoga is, in-depth analysis, decolonization, as you mentioned. Definitely going to tap into that in a little bit later section of this episode. But first, we got to understand who Kendra is. So we're going to take it back. We got to roll back the curtains and kind of like figure out, you are of Caribbean and Romani heritage. So how was it growing up with two cultures? Um, and how did that play a role in the identity of Kendra as a woman?
Yeah, I think so. My dad has schizophrenia. So I didn't grow up with my dad around a lot. However, when I was about 12 years old was the first time I traveled to the Caribbean on my own to meet the rest of my family. And so I was a
Mm.
bit disconnected from my Caribbean culture until I was about 12. And then I started to form relationships with my family and travel back and forth, um, which was really good. And I really needed that because I grew up in a Hungarian Romani household. So,
Mm.
I grew up like eating
Yeah.
cabbage rolls, thinking like that was what everybody ate.
Yeah.
My cultural horizons hadn't really been expanded yet. But I think being able to travel at a really young age to go meet my family overseas really inspired me to become a traveler. And so, as I grew up and went into my teens and my 20s, I did a lot of traveling, and that really also influenced how who I am today.
Right. And traveling is always a big topic with every single guest that they come in. I feel like I'm the only one who wasn't traveled. So I'm glad that kind of brought in some identity into yourself. But you mentioned about growing up without having a close relationship with your dad and also like with your family in the Caribbean. How did that affect you as a person when you grew up? What kind of challenges did you encounter not having like a regular family like most people do?
I mean, so my mom remarried at one point, and I was raised by my stepdad, who was a really great father. He was very involved, and I felt in a lot of ways like I did have a pretty normal childhood for that reason.
Hmm.
Um, but certainly there were aspects of having two white parents that made things challenging, like even simple things like my hair. I didn't have anyone in the household who really knew how to plait hair, or
Right.
other than like my mom could put in box braids, not with extensions, just straight braid our hair, or she would like pick our afros out. And so um, I really struggled even going into my 20s to even know how to do my own hair. I learned a lot just on YouTube, watching other folks do their hair, and with the connections that I built with other Black women later in life, who taught me how to tend to my hair. So there's like pieces of identity I think that I struggled with early on because I didn't have examples to learn from, or to look up to. And I think
Mm,
also it wasn't until I really moved out of my parents' home that I really had the experience of like what it is to walk through the world as a Black person. Because when you're growing up with two white parents, you're really protected by your proximity to whiteness. So you don't face a lot
mm.
of racism, out in the world, because you have two white parents and they're not going to say that kind of stuff in front of, two other white folks.
Right.
But when
Right.
I was out on my own for the first time, then I really had the experience of like what it means to walk through the world Black, and I didn't have the resources or the resiliency that I think I might have had I grown up in closer connection to more of my Black family. So
Right.
that was like a steep learning curve for me, was like how to be in the world, and in a world that really wasn't made to support my well-being.
Right. Right. So in those moments where your shield is taken away in the realm of your parents, the proximity goes away when you move out. At what point do you feel like you started getting in tune with that? Was it when you traveled to the Caribbean for the first time to meet your mom's family, or was it that pivotal moment of moving away from the proximity of whiteness that kind of showed you, okay, it's a different world out here?
Yeah, so it's my dad's family that's in the Caribbean, and I met them in when I was a kid. So that wasn't necessarily where um, I developed that resiliency. And I think, if I'm being honest, my family still has a lot of internalized white supremacy themselves, and so there's a lot of color blindness and a lot that they themselves have not had opportunities to practice. I remember going as a kid to the yacht club where my aunt worked, and I had to wait outside because like Black folks were not allowed inside if they weren't working, and that was just like a normal part of like day-to-day life, so it was still very segregated in the Caribbean at that point, as when I was a kid. And so yeah, I don't know that I necessarily learned those skill sets from them. I think part of it was like the struggle of like getting out there, not being protected, and then being like, what do I do? And the relationships I had at that point were a lot of like other white friends. I didn't have a lot of friends of color because I'd grown up in a predominantly white neighborhood. And so
Right.
even as I shared these experiences, the people around me didn't understand them. They didn't get them. They minimized them. And so I really at that point had to like interrogate what ideas I was holding so that I could begin to build forward community with other people of color and other Black folks.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. That's a learning experience that we kind of have to go through. I don't want to say that I resonate, but I kind of feel that I grew up in Kenya where it was predominantly just other Black folks, like it was mostly Black people, like Africa. So when I first moved here, I was having challenges on the reverse side where it was hard for me to connect with other white folks because it's like I didn't grow up around them. So it becomes harder to make these connections or authentic connections with people that you don't really understand their culture. And to this day, it's still something that I struggle with a little bit, because I'm still evolving, I'm still learning how to encompass everybody in one bowl and not see like color, or not necessarily not see color, but just see everybody as a human being, because I'm of the mindset that we just here to connect,
Mhm.
as humans first and foremost.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad that you kind of got through that, and now you're in a better space to deal with these things. The resiliency has built up. At what point does Kendra get introduce herself to yoga, and what triggers that? Like, how do you get into yoga?
The actual practice of yoga I started when I was pregnant with my child. So that was like 14 years ago. I just had really bad sciatica in my hip, and so I started going in hopes of like reducing pain in my body. And I had already like had some mindfulness practices. Like I didn't meditate regularly, but I was aware of like breath work would be helpful. I was aware of simple kind of mindfulness practices. But after I had my child, um, they I continued to go to yoga, and I ended up going to this like restorative class somewhere like a couple years later, and I had this like very radical kind of experience where I remember like laying on the floor, and I had this like sudden vivid like blue light that like filled my eyes even though my eyes were closed. And I remember at the end of that class, I turned to my friend and I was like, "Did you see that blue light?" She was like, "Girl, no." What are you talking about? I was like, "That was weird." Um, and I think that was like kind of the first time I really had like I had some encountered something other than just like, oh, I'm moving my body and I'm stretching and it feels good, and that was it. That was kind of the basis of my practice. But after that, I started to get more curious about what else was there and started to deepen my practice and learn to meditate. And I started going to workshops and trying to find teachers. And one thing led to another. And I think in 2014, I did a Vipassana sit while I was in Indonesia. So it's like a 10-day silent retreat.
Hmm.
And that was where I kind of had my very first big like breakthrough um, of recognizing like a deeper level of consciousness. And then I continued with that practice for a few years. And then in 2016 or 2017, I went to India to find a master to teach me. And there I went to a small village called Kuilapalayam, which is in Tamil Nadu. And I
Hmm.
studied under Swami Vivekanand for, I completed 500 hours under him. And I had never even intended to be a yoga teacher. I just wanted to learn for my own curiosity.
Right, right.
Yeah. And then when I came back, the Me Too movement happened. And so there was a lot
Hmm.
of folks who were really struggling with trying to process sexual violence. And I had found that over the years, I had developed so much more resiliency and ability to regulate my emotions and move through really difficult things. And so I felt almost a responsibility at that point to begin sharing the practice. And so I started running like a yoga nidra, a meditation night for survivors of sexual violence on Main Street in Vancouver. And then I started to host a Black space as well for Black yoga. And I did those twice a week. And that's how it slowly started there. And now I'm here, even though I had
There's
not intended to.
there is a lot to unpack in that segment you just mentioned, and we're gonna go sequentially double click in each section, because I feel like each section leads to another. Because you said prior you didn't really have a lot of mindful practices, and if you could just go back and take us through some of the first mindful practices that you put yourself into, as you started this journey, what what sorts of practices could you pinpoint as pivotal to shaping Kendra as a lady today,
What practices did I begin at the beginning?
whether it was conscious or unconscious?
Yeah, I think like the first ones that I learned were around like just body scans, like what is happening in my body. So just noticing like what's happening in my head. How do my shoulders feel? How does my back feel? What's happening in my arms or my legs? And so just beginning to build a relationship to notice what's happening in my body was kind of the first one. I think for a lot of survivors of sexual violence, we shut that part down because when you experience violence, it's not safe to actually be in your body. And so you disconnect because it's the best way to survive the experience. And so the practice of like coming back into my body was a slow practice of just like, how does my body feel in this moment? And then like, I might go back into dissociation for a bit. And so it was like kind of a, you dip your toe in the water a little bit at a time until it feels safer. And then you go a little bit deeper and you go a little bit deeper until you feel like you've landed back in your body.
Right. And as a sexual violence survivor and somebody who's gone through that experience, I think mindfulness, correct me if I'm wrong, from what I'm hearing, is it allows you to tap into your body again. And hearing you say that from a perspective of like you disassociate or you shut down because you've experienced violence in your body. That's your temple, that's your most precious gift, and it holds life. So it becomes hard to love yourself or be in your body mindfully. So, how do you, when that experience happens, how does that affect the relationship with yourself and those around you in the near term when that event happens?
I mean, it's tough to like pinpoint, and I can't say for what the experience is like for other survivors. I would say that it's not it's not that I disconnect from my body; it's that somebody violates that space, that sacred space, and so then it no longer feels like a safe space to rest. Like I feel like I can't relax. I feel like my nervous system becomes activated. When I walk alone at night and there's a man nearby, it's my heart rate that goes up. And so it doesn't feel safe to be in my body. Like the feelings of fear that you feel if someone were to jump out at you, those are running in your body all the time. That
Wow.
hypervigilance is always there. Like I would go to the grocery store, I've got my keys between my knuckles in case I have to use them. And other people wouldn't even know that I'm having this experience, but that fear is active in my body all the time. I'm perpetually in fight or flight. So just settling into my body to be like, how do I feel today is very difficult because the nervous system is so active. Um,
Right.
and so that's what I mean is like, and it's actually very mentally exhausting. It's emotionally exhausting. It's physically exhausting. So you come
Mhm.
home and you put the TV on and you zone out. You're not present. You're not present in your body. You're not present with those around you. You're not present in your life. So connection becomes more difficult because, someone's like, how are you feeling? And you're like, I don't know. I can't, it's hard to feel into myself. I don't know what I'm feeling. I just feel anxious or I just feel depressed. But you can't name like, oh, my heart rate is elevated and I'm feeling like a constriction in my chest. It's really hard to pinpoint that because it's difficult to connect with the body.
Wow. That's that's insane. And I'm learning so much right now because as you said, like you're walking in the grocery store. If I'm just a regular dude walking next to you, I'm thinking, oh, that's another fellow black lady. Hey, what's up? How you doing? But
Yeah.
you're going through sort of like a crisis type thing. Like there's a lot that's going on to your head.
Yeah. And what I would say to that is that like more than one in four women have reported sexual violence. That's like who have reported it to the police. Realistically, I've never met a woman in my life who has not experienced sexual violence at some point. So I think it's very likely that a lot of folks, women, gender nonconforming folks, are walking around with their nervous system activated all the time
Hmm.
or a good portion of the time. Yeah.
That's
And if it's
insane.
not through sexual violence, it's like domestic violence or they witness violence or you still have the fear when you're in this body, in a female body, what happens out there in the world. We just
Right.
watched this thing on the internet, like, what would you rather be in the forest, a man or a bear? Women are choosing the bear, even if they haven't been assaulted, they just know that it's not safe. And so it's really difficult to like be in your body, to be present in your heart and present in love when your body doesn't feel safe.
Right. I thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that so much because I spoke to a therapist one time and she was mentioning the one of the biggest essence of us as human beings is the feeling of safety. So
Yeah.
when we as humans, men or women, feel like we're not safe or we're not heard or we feel like we're just in a space of danger, as you said,
Hmm.
your nervous system just kind of starts going off. It's like alarm, it's like a car, just lights coming on everywhere, you know. And
Hmm.
typically in that state you don't know what to do. you're like, oh, what light is it and which one is it? Because I can't think. And that's the same feeling that you're saying. When you get back home, you can't think, so you zone out. Put on the
Yeah.
TV, music, or whatever it is that we use to distract ourselves, drugs, and that's not a good way to live life, right?
Yeah.
Because you suppress that for so long, but at one point, that
It'll come
suppression
out.
will get to the tipping point. And
Definitely.
typically that's where it goes crisis. Now we're in crisis.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
You
So
know, people don't.
I'm curious. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious to know. Did you ever reach a point of being
Crisis?
filled and then tipping point?
Oh, definitely. I think I was in, and I've talked about this many times. I was in college, and it was like I think maybe the second or third time I'd been assaulted, and I couldn't process it. I was like deeply mentally ill. Um, I was going to school full time. I was working full time, trying to like balance life, and I just like snapped and decided to take my own life. So I climbed up on the Granville Street Bridge to jump off, and I had this like prayer in my heart. I was like, if there's a God out there, if there's I don't care who it is, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, like whoever it is, if there's a God out there, then help me in this moment. And in that moment, like the person I was dating at the time, who I later married, came rollerblading over the bridge, even though they didn't know where I was. They just was like, I had this gut feeling you'd be here, and they came over the bridge like in that moment, and that was like a big turning point in my life where I really had to start looking at my mental health. I had to be hospitalized at that point um, for depression. I was in the hospital for 4 months, and I had like I'd lost my will to live, and so yeah, I had to find that will back in like little pieces, which is how I actually got into art, into photography. Was my psychiatrist at the point was like, I need you to like do something every day, like something creative, anything creative. And so I'd take
Hmm.
my camera and I'd go like take pictures of plants outside, and I hated it. she was like, it was like going there in the pandemic when they're like, go for your mental health walk, and you're like, I'm on my stupid mental health walk. It was like that at first. But that actually led me down a path that I was a professional photographer for 13 years. I became a documentary photographer before I became a yoga teacher. And so that really like shifted the trajectory of my life. And I think through photography and having to like being in a creative process and continuously reflecting on my creative process really started to bring my attention back inward. And that's when I started to get curious about yoga and curious about other practices that mindfulness practices, meditation and whatnot that deepen that process. But I think it probably the first time I turned my attention inward was probably actually through art.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, thanks for sharing that. I do believe angels are real. And from that story, like there's so many people that I talk to and they say X was about to happen. And the severity of X is dependent on each person. But when they
Mm-hmm.
say X was about to happen, when you tell me that and you said that your partner is rollerblading to come to the exact place that you're it,
Mm-hmm.
that's to me, if you question if there was a God, Buddha, yeah, that that
Yeah,
moment,
I
yes,
really
I
felt like I got
yeah,
confirmation in that
I
moment.
agree. I
And I
that
really
I
that if when we call out to the universe, whether it's in celebration or whether it's in crisis, it responds. I really believe that.
there's a saying that I to just piggyback off that point, there's a saying that goes, the universe whispers until it screams. So
Mm-hmm.
anything that you constantly have thoughts or voices kind of like whispering slowly, but then one day you just see it. So
Mm-hmm.
it gives you signs and little directions to go to somewhere, and then whether good or bad, because it wants you to learn something. And from that point where you almost took your life to the point where you get to be creative with photography, you become a,
Mm-hmm.
you know, documentary photographer, and then from that you now go into it's connected.
It
It's
has a
literally
trajectory.
like it's connected. It's a trajectory. So I'm glad that you took up photography as a hobby. I try to do photography myself. I was kind of okay. I'm not gonna say I was good, but uh, I'm proud. I'm proud of people who actually take photos because it's very subjective. Somebody can look at your photo and say, what are you doing?" And then other
Mm-hmm.
people will look at it and marvel and still like, "Oh, that's a great photo." So yeah, photography. You did that for 13 years.
I'm 13, about 14. I just kind of wrapped it up last year.
Well, why did you wrap it up? Just to kind of close the photography chapter.
I mean, I really to lean into the yoga, which is what I felt like my calling, the universe is calling me to do, and I had been resisting it for a number of years. Like I said, I started teaching on the in Vancouver around like 2016 or 2017,
Right.
and it was like not a side hustle. I didn't want to be a yoga teacher. I was just there to help a few people in my community, and then be that like go back to my photography. But
Right.
the need for healing, for safe spaces, for community, for a decolonized spiritual practice was so strong that like the universe was like, I need you to do this work for me. So
Right. And I love that because sometimes whatever it is that we feel like our calling is so hard to kind of recognize it, but you might go through different stages, and photography was that pathway to your calling, right?
hmm
Like it allowed you to tap into your creative space. It allowed you to get back into your body to kind of like go for these mental health walks. Now you're kind of like yourself. You're understanding yourself. There's clarity coming through. And I feel like the only way you can recognize or tap into your purpose is when you have clarity with yourself. So
yeah,
I
I mean,
feel
you have to be able to go inward and hear your innermost voice, you know.
mm,
Because that's really where
yeah.
spirit's speaking. Spirit's not speaking to. It doesn't call me up and is like, "Hey, Kendra, go run this errand for me." You know, it comes through in like the innermost knowing, the most like when I'm tapped into the most sacred part of myself. That's when I feel it rise up in me.
So in order to do that, you have to be able to listen. And that takes me to the first silent retreat that you experienced. How was that experience, like doing a silent retreat? I've always been curious about silent retreats. That's why it's on my mind.
Yeah. Um. So I would say the first part of like connecting in with yourself is you have to get still and you have to get quiet, and that's very difficult for a lot of people. We live in a culture of capitalism and where we have to like continuously be going to get our basic human needs met,
Hmm.
despite how abundant the earth is. And so we kind of get in this mindset of like, if I'm not being productive, if I'm not doing a thing, then I'm being lazy or I'm wasting my life from, and so the idea of like just sitting still, doing nothing, just watching your own breath for like 12 hours a day, 10 days straight is like, a lot of people are like, absolutely not. I was too. I was very resistant at first. I remember I was in Indonesia at the time, and even though I had registered for this and taken myself there, I remember laying in bed on like day 4, being like, "Okay, I'm gonna jump the fence. I'm gonna find someone who speaks English. I'm gonna hitchhike to Ubud. Then from Ubud, I'm gonna get to Java. I'll get to the Canadian consulate, and I'll get a new passport. They can just keep the passport I have. I just need to escape." Plan. And I remember laying there and being like, Kendra, you put yourself here. Like, this is not the end of the world. But here, it was so difficult and so uncomfortable to sit with myself. I was like literally ready to like jump the fence and leave my passport, leave my clothes, whatever. It's fine. I'll get new clothes.
I'm like, hey, listen, I did my part. I showed up. I gotta go though. Like, I gotta go.
Yeah. And then I think day 6, I had like my first like breakthrough where like suddenly all the chatter in my mind just went and I was just tapped in. And and then you kind of touch this like inner peacefulness. It's like a blissfulness. The yogic texts call it ananda. So you touch it, and then when you get a taste of it and you know it's possible and you know that you've generated it from within yourself, it doesn't come from drugs, it doesn't come from psychedelics, it doesn't come from an outside source, it doesn't come from falling in love. It's an inner joy, it's an inner
Right.
peacefulness, it's an inner blissfulness nobody else can give you. Once you know that's accessible to you, you want to keep going back.
Right.
And it's like I
And
could tell you 100 times about it, but until you've touched it yourself, then and it's arisen from within you, then you know what I'm talking about.
right. It's like reading a theory, but then until you practice that theory, you could never understand it because just reading it in a book is not the same way as actually doing it and proving that the theory is true. So
Definitely.
I
When I
I
talk
I
about when I
yeah, go
talk about
ahead.
this ananda or this kind of inner blissfulness, it's like trying to describe the color red to somebody who has no eyesight, who's never seen. And I'm like, well, it's kind of warm and it's got this kind of like vividness to it. And they're like, this is black. I don't have anything to even compare it to. Or, I'm trying to explain what a peach tastes like to someone who doesn't have taste buds. I'm like, it's kind of sweet, but they can sometimes be a little bit tart if you get them unripe. And it's like, got this kind of like, like citrusy, but not quite taste, but they've never tasted anything.
Hmm.
So there's no thing to compare it to. So it's difficult to tell somebody this is what it's like unless they've gone in and touched it themselves.
I love that. I love that. And I think I've experienced it like a couple of times. Just I'm not a deep yoga instructor, but I do my meditations, and I feel like there's moments in my life, especially at one point where I was practicing sobriety, and there was nights that I felt this inner peacefulness that I had never felt before. After month number 3, I would say, because it took a while to like reconnect with myself, so I had to face some demons and experience those feelings, and then after a while they stopped,
Mm.
and then I started feeling at peace with myself, and I started feeling like I know who I am. I know Greg. If you ask me who I am now, I can tell you without hesitation. Back
Mm-hmm.
then I wouldn't be able to tell you. And that's why I'm able to come to this conversation, show up as myself, despite the fact that, sometimes I don't even know some of the people I'm introduced to, but I'm confident that the connection is authentic because I know I'll show up as myself and they'll show up as themselves. So there's a peacefulness to that, but I'm still growing and I'm still learning. And just kind of hearing your story also tells me that's it. That's it. No drugs, no love, nothing can give you that peace. It's something that I crave to go back to. I don't have the practices, or maybe you do, but I don't have those practices to kind of go into and tap into. Because I feel like I want to maintain that state for life. Like I just
Yeah.
want to stay there. Like,
I mean, that's
it's
the
like
goal.
if so
That's enlightenment.
how do you maintain it? How do you maintain it? How do you maintain it? So after the silent retreat, you go to India, and now you do this great coursework and you become certified, or you're a grandmaster. Like, what does that mean to you, and how does that affect you or change you as a person?
So at that point, I was a yoga master, not a grandmaster yet.
Hmm.
And I, again, I didn't want to teach. I was just kind of teaching on the side. So I think I was learning in that moment what it means to hold space for other people and just like learning like what it really means to teach. Like I wasn't a teacher. I didn't go to school. I didn't have like a pedagogy. I didn't have like a method of teaching. You just go and you like learn the breath work, you learn the practices, but like actually transmitting those teachings to another person is its own art. So I think it took me a number of years to learn. Even once you have a deep understanding, there's kind of like layers of knowing. There's like I've heard it. I heard about meditation, so I know it exists. And then there's like I've sat down and I've practiced it, and I'm in this kind of I'm learning how to do it phase. And then there's like I'm adept at it. I know how to do it. And then there's like I intellectually and I not only intellectually understand it, but I'm embodying the practice. And then there's I'm teaching the practice to somebody else now. So there's different layers of understanding. And I think it wasn't until I started teaching that some of my own layers started to deepen. It was like I could do the practices, I was adept at them, I understood them intellectually, but I wasn't living them until I started teaching them to other people.
All right, right.
Right? Because the
And
people would ask me questions and I would have to be like, oh yeah, how do I do that? Or what is that? So it really forced me to go like deeper into my practice, or people would come and say, well, this part's hard for me. And so I'd have to like, okay, so how do I support this person? Or how do we work with that? The reality of people having different needs in their bodies, or, coming with different traumas and things like that. I had to go and learn, I had to learn, I did another course on trauma informed yoga. I learned nonviolent communication. I went and did a course on how to be like a suicide hotline prevention, person. So I took all of these courses so that I could support people in my community as they came forward with like different traumas or things that they were going through. And I was like, oh, I'm under resourced. I can't actually support you. So let me go out and find the resources that I need so that I can transmit these teachings, but also in a way that's going to work for you.
I love that because I read somewhere the best way to learn is to teach. And by the looks of it, the way you became a great yoga teacher is by, learning and teaching. You learn by yourself and you taught to your community, which is just amazing um, in itself. So kudos to you, man. A lot of self work, a lot of a lot of taking initiative. And I think there's a lot of like just doing things for the sake of doing it and then somehow finding meaning in those things, which is kind of like a theme that I'm starting to realize all greats that I've done pods with do. Is just like, so did you mean to go to Indonesia? No, I just kind of went. Oh,
Mm,
wow, great. I guess it's just sometimes you just got to do it. So,
yeah.
but yeah, and in terms of yoga as a practice, I know the teachings have shaped you to be the person that you are. What aspect of like fitness does that come into play into your life? Like, in what ways, as an instructor, you have to do a lot of teaching and you have to do a lot of stretching? That's physical exercise in itself. So, what role as a physical fitness tool has yoga played in your life?
Zero. Nothing.
Whoa.
Not at all. It's like a very strong misconception of what yoga is in the West. People look at it as an exercise practice. It's not. It's a spiritual
Mm-hmm.
practice, you know. And so we look at the body as having multiple layers that we tend to. One of them is a physical layer. You know, I eat food, and that food is converted into energy that I use to speak, to think, to walk through the world. And so if I put food in and it doesn't come back out the other end, either in expression of energy or through my food waste, then it sits in my body and it makes me sick.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so a lot of the physical practice of yoga, the asanas, the movements that we're doing, are very centered around supporting digestion, and
Mm,
supporting systems, ways that our body naturally has to get waste energy out of the body, and to improve things like circulation, you know, like old oxygen sitting around in your body that hasn't been exhaled back out. You know, you have dead blood cells that are floating around that need to go out through the urine. You know, they need to go through the kidneys and be filtered out and then urinated out. So a lot of yoga is supporting the processes that your body naturally has for removing waste, but it only tends to the physical layer. There is some overlap, but when we're talking about like emotional health, we're looking at more like pranayama. How do I regulate my nervous system through the breath? When we're talking
mm-hmm.
about mental health, it's a practice of meditation. I know a ton of people who practice yoga every day and they're still assholes. So the just come for the fitness, you don't actually deepen. You have to tend to all of these layers of yourself, you know. And if you
Right.
don't, if you get out of yoga class and then you start a fist fight in the parking lot, the practice is not working.
It's not doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, and I see people like that, you know, like they come out all, and then they leave the door and immediately like, excuse me, I was walking here. Like, you guys. So
like,
you know,
come
I
on
think
now.
of it,
Mhm.
yeah, fitness for me is like the first step on the ladder, but the ladder is tall. So the first step is like, I have a body. I'm noticing I have a body. How can I support this body? And that's it. But then there's all these other layers that deepen us towards our connection with spirit. Um, you know, our ability to feel what others are feeling, our empathy, our compassion. We have layers of like, I kind of describe the mental body as when we're born, we have this clean slate, this clean mind. And people put all sorts of seeds in our little garden. Some of them are good, some of them are like the values that we carry throughout life, but some of them are not helpful. And they become like
Mhm.
weeds that overtake the garden, and we have to spend a lot of time kind of digging up the root of the weed. And then once we
Right.
have a clean garden bed again, we can decide what gets planted in there. Like, okay, I like dahlias. I'm going to put dahlias here. I'm going to put roses
Mhm.
here. Dandelions, we're not planting anymore. We've got enough. We're good. So we need these like kind of multifaceted practices to tend to all the different pieces of us. There are a lot of people who fitness for them becomes another distraction, another way of actually avoiding the body, another way of trying to control their experience, you know, another way of avoiding, I think people a lot of time they go to fitness because they're like, I don't want to get sick. I don't want to
Mm,
die early, but you actually don't have control over that. And that's a piece that a lot of
mm.
people don't want to acknowledge. You could work out every day, you could eat all the green food and you still get cancer. You could work out every
Uh,
day, eat unlimited food, and get hit by a bus. So there's like, I think this kind of, especially in the West, this kind of cultural obsession with like health that we can somehow control And I think we don't always interrogate what is actually underlying our drive towards fitness, which is oftentimes the desire to control what is uncontrollable.
Gems on gems on gems. Like, just beautiful. And there was something you mentioned about the West looking at yoga as a physical tool rather than a spiritual practice. I'm curious to know, why is that? Why is it that we're so, like, the people on the West side are so encompassed with this yoga as a physical practice to tone your body or to do XYZ with your body. Like, when and now I'm learning too. I'm not gonna sit here and say I had the knowledge that you're spewing right now, but it's good to be aware of that, because the spiritual realms makes so much sense. You know,
Yeah.
uh,
It's
yeah.
multifaceted. I think part of it is a huge part of it is colonization, and the subjugation of people of color and looking at their information systems like they have less value. Like, oh, it's not proved
Mhm.
in science or it's not proved by this particular, peer reviewed group. So it must not be true. And we're not even going to interrogate it. We're not even going to look into this really deeply. And I think the more that people do, the more we take like Western science and overlap with yoga, there actually is a lot of evidence that we see the ways that it impacts our physical body. We see the benefits for mental health. We see the benefits for emotional well-being. We see how it builds community and helps people to get into their heart. But initially, I think there was a lot of anti-Hindu sentiment at the time that yoga began to come into the West. And I think like when colonization happens, oftentimes colonizers look at these communities, which are often communities of color, as if they're savages or underdeveloped. They don't have
Right.
information systems. They don't have knowledge. And so it gets dismissed, even though it's, 5,000-year-old practice that people have been coming into various states of consciousness for thousands of years. That part gets dismissed. The other piece is, I think, the wellness industry and fitness industry and weight loss industry are multi-billion-dollar businesses. And it is
Mhm.
always easier to make someone feel shitty about their body and be like, for a low, low price of $20 per month, you can be a membership at my gym, or you can,
Right.
come to my yoga class. And so I think it's hard. It's harder to sell people on like, and I know this because I'm that yoga teacher. It's harder to be like, come to my class and get more conscious. Kind of like your own heart, like people are like, yeah, yeah, whatever. I just want abs. So
Right. Right.
it,
Right.
it is a struggle. It's a hard sell to be like, I want you to sit still and just breathe and watch your own breath. People are like, no, I'm not paying for that.
It's not.
You're like,
It's
oh,
not. It's not distracting me enough. I No.
then I
It's
have to
not
sit with my
distracting me
demons.
enough.
Yeah, I want to
Yeah.
sit with my demons, and I don't want to. So I think that's also a huge reason as to why yoga gets kind of commodified into this fitness practice, because it's more convenient for even the practitioner than to sit with themselves really and go into any sort of depth. It takes a lot of commitment, a lot of work, and I've had privilege like in being a photographer. I had the funds to travel overseas to go and study under a master. That takes time. I sat in an ashram multiple times in silent. That means I had to have my rent paid. I had to have, access to food, things like that. And so, especially for marginalized communities, people who are living in the margins, who have less resources, just like
Hmm.
taking 10 days off work to go to sit meditation, it's not even an option. So,
It's a
um,
luxury.
it's a look. It is.
It's a
It's a
luxury.
privilege.
Yeah.
To be able to observe yourself and go deeply into the self is a privilege in this world, and I think that's very much on purpose. Things are set
Hmm.
up so people don't have time or energy to look deeply into themselves. Somebody benefits from that. Somebody profits from that.
You mentioned capitalism. That's it right there.
Yeah.
Distract them until they don't have time for themselves, so that they can fund this machine that generates billions of dollars to other people, but you can just make just enough so that you're not in a certain level, but you're making just enough to be comfortable. And that's
Yeah.
just how it is. And there's one thing you touched about control and fitness, and I've always questioned that. I've always questioned my motivation to go to the gym. Why is it like, and I want to kind of learn, because like I ask myself this question all the time. Is it vanity, or is it, why do I actually go to the gym? Like,
Hmm.
is it to better my mental health, or is it because I want to control the uncontrollable, as you said, like long life, health. But anything can happen, as you said. I don't have control over that. Whether I lift 10 pounds or 60, it doesn't matter because some of these things are very instant and you can't tell. So like when it comes to like fitness, what's I don't know my motivation, and I'm curious to kind of view your hear your perspective on like having a wholesome approach to like a fit mind, fit body, fit soul, rather than just looking at the body and saying, yeah, this is all I'm going to focus on and this is all I'm going to do for the
Mhm.
fitness
I mean,
part of
I
my
can't
life.
say. I think people all have their own reasons for working out, their own motivations, and I think what I would invite folks to do is to really interrogate what is my motivation. Is it part of I feel lazy, or that like there's a voice in your head that says, "Well, I have to because of X, Y, and Z. Or then I'll be fat. Then I'll be lazy. Then I'll be, I'll get sick." And so, what is the story that we're telling ourselves to motivate
Mm.
ourselves to go to the gym? And then who planted that idea there? Does that come from within you, or was that something that you heard from an outside source? Did you hear it on the
Interrogate
news? Did you
deeply.
hear it from a parent? Did you hear it from a doctor? Like, where is this information coming from, or is it arising from within the core of your being? I think,
Right.
we used to live in more communal settings where we used to get a lot more physical activity. Like we would be farming together or we would be building homes together. And so our bodies were getting more activity and we didn't have to like dedicate time to go to the gym. And I think that as we kind of make a return to that, a return to our own heart, we're going to find we want more community. We want to spend time eating healthy food. We don't want food that's full of chemicals and things like that. And that will require that we have to grow our own food. Um, and so I think as we slowly start to cycle back towards more communal living, there will be less need eventually to go to a specific gym or space to work out because we will be using our bodies more because we will have to.
I love that idea, and I got a follow-up question for that real quick because
Mhm.
how do you see us shifting back to communal living in the era of social media? Because I feel like social media has sh- it's it's supposed to be social, but it's created a gap between people. Because I
Mhm.
could talk to you on Instagram, but then have I really spent time with you to actually grab a coffee or go for a walk or do this? Because I feel like more and more people just text back and forth than spend quality time together.
So I kind of parse out what is the question there is how do I think?
The shift of like you say, there's a shift that's going to go back to like communal living, which will kind of like make people go away from going to like a physical gym because now we'll be doing things together. But then I'm on the mindset like, oh, I think that's from my observation, what I'm seeing is like we're going away from that because of the social media influence. Like people are not really connecting together anymore, and people are more like just texting and reaching out for this instant messages, emails, yada yada yada. So there's a disconnect in real life and there's no community, and that's why these other things are thriving, like the fitness where you have to go to a gym rather than go for walks with your friends or build houses with your friends type thing.
I think I feel like hesitant to even say this, but I think that the Western society as we know it will collapse. I think that you can't have endless resource extraction. Capitalism is going to cap out at some point. You can't just cut all the trees down forever and take all the fish out of the ocean forever and pollute the sky and drive the temperature up endlessly. Like something will
Hmm.
break. We're going to hit the breaking point. And I think that the reality is there is a lot of corruption, a lot of greed in our in governments, not just in Canada, around the world. Everywhere there's
Right,
corruption. And
right.
so those corrupt sources are going to push back. They're going to want to keep taking more, and people will have to disconnect. We see this in like privatization of tons of resources, education, of healthcare, more and more push for those kinds of things, which means people are going to lose their access to them. And so we're going to have no other option but to depend on each other. We won't be able to depend on government structures and sources. We won't be able to just assume that those things are going to be there. And I often tell people this is like if there's an earthquake, the government even tells you you need 72 hours at least before you can expect a response. So who's going to pull you out of the rubble? It's the guy next door, regardless of their politics, regardless of their religion or their belief. It's your next door neighbor is the first person who's going to respond if your house is on fire.
Mm.
So I think we have like this is the time, especially in this era of like, we just saw Trump get voted back in. This is the time that we need to really spend building close knit communities of like the people who are immediately around us to start to repair some of
Hmm.
those relationships, and
Right.
also like who wants to, what are we building next? If this whole thing is inevitably going to collapse, what do we want to move towards? Because it's terrifying, but it's also thrilling. Like we get to build anything we want now. If this thing
Mm.
collapses, we get to decide as a people, how do we want to live?
Mm.
And
Mm.
so then to find people who are like sharing a vision of like, okay, so if this collapses, I want to help people by gardening, or I want to grow food in my community. Okay, so then you find your other gardeners and you develop the skills of how do we grow food in this climate? What does that look like? What foods can be paired with what foods, to support the growth of another? We start to build up our skill sets, and we start
Right.
to, I think we all come into this world with gifts. We start to find people who share our gifts and learn and share information, and we build each other up. And I think this is the era that we start to do that work because we're going to need it later.
Right. Right. This conversation, I could go so deep into it because there's so much that I want to decode with you right now, but I'm not gonna get carried away. But I will actually message you on the side because I need to share more about that. And just because we're talking about community and relationships, I think that's typically how the segment comes through in a way that when you think about motherhood, I know you mentioned like motherhood earlier. How did that change you as a person, and how do you enjoy being a mother?
Well, first, I love being a mom. I think the day that I birthed my child and I held them, it was the first day I really knew unconditional love, because this little human had done nothing but cause me hell for 9 months. I was puking every day. I had sciatica. I was in pain. I got diabetes. Like just everything that could go wrong in a pregnancy went wrong. And then I held them for the first time and I just loved them. I just loved them for free. They didn't have to earn my love. They didn't have to earn my trust. They didn't have to do anything. I just loved them wholeheartedly. I wanted the best for them. I wanted to see them grow into their best version of themselves. And so
Mm,
I think that was the first time I really felt unconditional love. And that changes a
mm,
person. When all the conditions that you placed on love are removed and you just love for the sake of loving, and that's a transformative experience. And I'm not saying that every parent has it, but for me, it was a transformative experience. What I wasn't expecting about motherhood was it to be as isolating as it was, especially in the early days. My kid's a teenager now, but and it's isolating in a different way because now they're like too cool to hang out with me. But when they were little, we don't live in communities that are closely knit, and so there was a lot of days where you're just like home alone with the baby, and you don't. I didn't have a lot of other friends who had kids at that time, so it was a deeply isolating experience. Even though my partner was there, um, it's like when you come home from the hospital, they hand you your baby, and they're like, "Good luck, don't kill it." Like, no, it doesn't come with an instruction manual.
There's
We
no
need community to be like, "Hey, this is how you like wash babies. This is how you cut their nails. This is how you."
right.
Bathe them, and so there's all these like skill sets that like the hospital's like, I don't know, you made it, so here you go.
Yeah.
Don't shake your baby. Here's how you put in the car seat, and that's it. And then so I really wish, looking back, that I had had, because this was in my early 20s. I wish I had more resources around me that could have supported me, because I think there was lots of moments where I felt really alone, or like I was a bad mom, like I was doing it wrong, um,
Mm,
or like just basic things, like as my spiritual practice deepened, my relationship to things like punishment and reward shifted. My ideas around discipline shifted. My ideas around living in integrity shifted, because now you have someone that's witnessing. You can say all the things, but if you're not living them, this little person's watching that. They're taking that in.
right. Yeah.
So there was lots of times where I wished that I had had other moms, especially other moms who are on some sort of consciousness or spiritual journey, that I could
Mm,
have shared and reflected with, and bounced ideas off of. But
right.
I also feel like I'm in a place where, like, my kid's a teen, but they're not gone. So I'm
Right.
developing more of that now. Yeah.
And yeah, it's an ongoing journey because that, you know, I don't have kids, but I feel like my mother and my father will always see me as a child. No matter how grown I think I am, to them,
Right,
I'm always their little one. So I think
right.
as you continue that journey, like I wish you the best in just learning and creating a safe environment for your child to be the best version of themselves. And
Mhm.
with all the shifts that are happening with discipline, reward, punishment, I think the consciousness that you give to your child is a blessing to the world, because now they'll give it to somebody else and they'll give it to the, and that's how it starts. That's how the movement grows.
Yeah.
So,
And I think it's also
uh,
like, in some way, despite our parents or our grandparents' best efforts, they did that in their own way too. They
mhm.
took what resources they had, and just like, an apple drops a tree, they cast their seed as far as they could and were like, just do better than me in this life. Go farther than me.
Right,
I want you to
right,
have more than I had. And I think, I feel a lot of gratitude to my ancestors, and my parents and my own family, despite their imperfections, because they did the very best they had with the resources that they had, and I'm grateful for that.
right. And this one is gonna tie back to like when you first experienced that unconditional love with your child. How does that shift your relationship with your partner at that time? Because I'm always curious when people are building relationships as you grow as a young adult, these conditions, these beliefs, these certain things that you've instilled in yourself that sometimes are not healthy. So when you encounter something that's healthy, for instance, the you know love that you felt for your child, or the blissfulness that you felt when you first went for a silent retreat, like how do those experiences shift your relationship with your partner?
Um, so in a lot of ways, I was recently saying to him, I was like, I feel so deeply grateful because I don't know that I could have done as much, like gone as far without his support. And I really feel like I've learned a lot about love from him, actually. I grew up in a bit of
Mm,
a dysfunctional home. It wasn't like a bad home by any stretch, but I didn't see a lot of like ways that my parents loved each other or loved us. I think they cared for each other. They took care of each other's needs. They took the very best care of us. But I don't know if I define love by bell hooks's definition, which is the will to extend oneself for the spiritual growth of oneself for another. So I didn't see that necessarily happen a lot in my home growing up. But my partner was always really a stable place that I could lean on. He was always like, he really would extend himself for my well-being. And so I learned a lot about how to do that for others through him. So I'm not sure if it necessarily changed my relationship to him. I think it probably deepened it in some ways.
mhm.
But yeah, I don't. That's a good question. I don't know. I think meditation shifted it in some ways because uh, when we go through a growth where we suddenly have this like expansion of consciousness, we have more awareness. One of the things that can happen if we aren't really mindful of like the places our ego wants to jump up is that we can become self-righteous. And so I think I went through a phase at one point where I became pretty self-righteous, like especially as I became more knowledgeable, had more wisdom, I suddenly knew the right way to do things. And I really am grateful for my partner who's deeply patient. He was like being married to the Dalai Lama, deeply patient man. Um, for just allowing me to have like my phases, whatever they look like, and for and sticking beside me regardless, because that allowed me to also reground back in and then pour into him in the ways that he had poured into me.
Right. And when you say you got to a point where you got self-conscious, like how do you like regulate that to come back to a level where, okay,
You mean
that let's
self-righteous?
not let's yeah, self-righteous, right? My bad.
So as I said, like he really poured into me. I remember one time very early in my yoga teaching career, somebody came in and they taught the class. At the end, they said something like really ignorant and kind of racist. And I went home just like mad. I was like, I don't want to teach this person anymore. They're ignorant. They're racist. And my partner was like, of course they're ignorant, Kendra. You're the teacher. They're coming to you. And I was like, oh, right. You know, like, I was like, oh, my like high, my high horse, and I had
Right.
considered like, oh yeah, they're coming to me to be more conscious. So of course they're gonna
Uh,
come from a less conscious place, and I wasn't being very compassionate to that reality of like,
right.
right. I just was like, obviously, why did they figure this out? As if I hadn't had my own journey being ignorant in my own ways that other teachers had held space for me to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciate my partner, his ability to sometimes like to see me through and through as like the best parts of me and the worst parts of me. Our marriage didn't wasn't I wouldn't say it's not successful. It shifted, it changed. So we were no longer romantically together anymore. We're just good friends now. But I still really feel um, that like my relationship with him, despite how it's changed, is still one of the places I get to practice love and like in an embodied way, not just
Right.
like as a concept in my head of like I thought love was going to be romantic, I thought it was going to look like this, but as a daily practice, a way of living. It's one of the few relationships where I still get to practice that.
Again, I'm I could go deep into that conversation. Like I could really chew in, but unfortunately we gotta come to a close of the episode. Just because, I wanna leave some for season two. There's so much I want to learn from you, and in the realm of just love, as you said, like now that you've mentioned you're no longer with your partner, but you still embody love. Some of these relationships in life, when you go through relationships, you lose some relationships, and
Mhm.
those moments also kind of teach you a lot about yourself, and they help you grow in a different dimension if you never kind of got away from this person. So I would love for you to decode that. If you have time, go ahead and do it. But if you don't, I'll go ahead and ask the last question. So I'm gonna let you choose.
Oh, I don't even know how to answer that. I'm going to say like yes. Yes, sometimes you lose a relationship and you it's a deep learning experience. And I think the beautiful thing that I really loved about the way that my marriage shifted was that um, we allowed it to transform. We
Hmm.
chose because it could have easily ended in an ugly divorce. It could have easily
Right.
chosen in us going into like our hurt selves. Um, but we chose love. And I think even though the shape of the relationship changed, from the outside, there are a lot of people who are married for 50 years, 60 years, and they don't really love each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think to keep choosing love with somebody, even when the shape of the relationship changes, is like a testament to your commitment to love.
Right. All right. Good answer. You had an answer for it. And yeah, I love that. I love that you chose love. Love wins every day, any day. Um, in whatever it is that we do, when you do it from a place of love, it's always a win. Typically, we like to end the episode with kind of like a recap of the journey of life that Kendra has experienced. And typically, I like to ask my guests, if you were to sum up your journey to this day with one word, what would it be and why? So I would ask the question in the realm of, if it all boils down to,
If I could sum up my journey in one word,
oh,
I would say maybe homeward bound.
Omar Brown, why do you say that?
I feel like there's a lot in our lives that pull us away from self. And I think that a huge part of my journey has been like finding my way home to self.
So coming back to yourself is something that you continuously strive to accomplish on a day to day, and you found some sort of peace
Yeah,
in that.
I think there's like, some things take us very far away from ourselves, like sexual violence or the conditions that we live within. They can be very difficult. There's a lot of suffering in the world. And so the practice of like coming home to your own heart again and again is like sometimes it's a slugfest. You're just like it's a fight to get back home to yourself. Other days it's easy, but like to really have a strong determination to continuously return home and to turn your own attention inward again, um, and to come back to the very heart of your being, I think is the biggest takeaway that I've had over the last, you know, 15 years of practice or whatever it's been now.
It's beautiful. And to just kind of wrap it up, I read somewhere, and I'm not sure if it's Gabe Macho or something like that. This I've seen his videos, and I think you posted him today.
Deborah
He talks
Maté.
about, yeah, that guy,
Mhm.
and he was talking about healing, and what healing means is to go back to your root, when, going back to touch your inner child. as pure as you were, without all the like the conformity of the world in your head or your belief system. So to heal is to go back and talk to that person and be at peace with that person. So it's to go back to yourself.
Yeah, I was recently
And
when I had like a big kind of just recently a big spiritual awakening again. And I was saying it feels like for a long time I've been like I took a rocket ship far away, from my life. And then I looked down and realized everything that I've been like striving towards is happening back on Earth. Everything is happening right back there. And I had to like circle the moon and then come all the way. And this place I'm in my life right now feels a bit like I'm in that like re-entry point. So if you've ever seen like a space movie when they're like coming through the atmosphere and there's like flames coming over the the whatever
yeah,
part of the rocket ship's called, and everything's like shaking, and they're like, "Are we gonna survive?" That moment before you hit the ocean, that's the where I'm kind of in my own journey right now is the re-entry back into the heart of myself, and I think that's where you need the strongest determination to like hold true to the practice to
hold
keep coming
on.
back to love and love, because when you arrive into the heart of yourself, there's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere else to be.
There's nowhere else to be. There's nowhere else to go. Wonderful. Kendra, it was such a beautiful honor to host you. And I learned so much. And I feel like I still want more. I still want to ask you so many questions about social media, community, love. There's so much that I could tap into. But I'm so super grateful for you trusting Limitless to kind of share your story and just be authentic and vulnerable. I really had a good time. I learned a lot. And I'm super grateful that you chose to come here. Just as a wrap up, where can the audience find you in terms of social channels or websites? Where can they go for that information?
Yeah, so you can find me with my name, just Kendra Copeland. It's kendracopeland.com. It's Instagram/Kendra Copeland, TikTok/Kendra Copeland, YouTube/Kendra Copeland. So just my name.
First name, last name basis. That's it. Simple
I try to
ABC type thing. Well, thank you so much for joining, Kendra, and we hope to have you again soon. Once we launch the second season of the show, on that show, it will be more about just life because you got so much gems, and I'm super grateful that you came in.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Kendra.